Okay, so this is the first video in our series on web frameworks. So far in the course, what we've done is learn basic HTML and CSS, really core skills that you need as a web designer or a web developer. And now we're going to start looking at some tools to speed up your design and development, tools that you would probably be using if you went out and worked as a web development professional. Okay, so what we're going to be looking at are called web frameworks, and all a web framework means is it's a collection of files that are going to give you some really common functionality so that you can get going quicker. And you might hear the term front-end framework. So when we talk about front-end in web development, that just means things like HTML, CSS, maybe JavaScript that gives some interaction to the page. It's everything that that you see in the browser and the user interacts with. So a front-end web framework is going to give us a bunch of functionality that will help us get going with that quicker. So if we look at some web frameworks, the one that we'll be using in this class is Bootstrap. There's quite a few of these, and for the most part they do really similar things. So if we look at the documentation for Bootstrap, when I say that it gives you common functionality or common components to use, the web, the vast majority of the web is made out of the same stuff. Okay, so we've got what are called breadcrumbs, right? These little menu guys that you'll see everywhere. We've got buttons right here. We've got drop-down menus. And so what a web framework will do is give you a really quick way to start using this functionality without having to write a bunch of code every time you just want another button or every time you want this drop-down functionality. So I kind of describe it in relation to Legos, right? So using HTML and CSS like we've been using, it's like when you had the big bucket of Legos and you could make whatever you wanted. It might take you a long time, but you could make a spaceship or you could make a castle. You could make your website look however you want. When we start using web frameworks, it's a little bit more like when you would get the like the castle theme set, right? And it would have the pieces that were already like a turret or a castle window, and you could just kind of piece them together, and you could build a castle really quick. And as long as it was a castle that you wanted to build, then you were doing really well, and you could build really quickly. So that's what web frameworks do, and they'll look really similar. So this one's called Bulma, and it's going to give you a lot of the same things that Bootstrap gives you, right? You've got these little card things, which are kind of a feature that we see on the internet. The other really important thing that a CSS framework or a front-end framework is going to give you is a grid system, okay? And this is probably the most important thing to know about frameworks is that almost always when we're building a website, we want columns, and especially if we want to build a responsive website, we want our columns to stack, right? We want to be able to define different columns on different sizes. And so one of the main things that CSS frameworks do is just give us a really quick way so that instead of spending your time building out your grid and doing your responsive CSS, you're just spending time really thinking about your content and your design and what you want the page to say and how you can use these tools. All right, so reasons that you might want to use a framework are it starts out your development really quickly. You don't have to write everything from scratch. You've got all these tools that you can just drop in. The CSS is really good, right? So Bootstrap, Bulma, these use really solid CSS written by people who really know what they're doing. So a lot of times it's very high quality CSS. Also, you get a really professional experience right off the bat, right? This site is built using Bulma. It looks really professional. This is what Bootstrap looks like. It looks really professional, so you can get started quicker. There are some reasons why you might not want to use a framework. So there's this idea that if you build a Bootstrap site, your site looks like a Bootstrap site. We've probably all seen sites that are built using Bootstrap and kind of recognize that style. Again, sometimes it's an issue, sometimes it's not. If you have really kind of unusual design goals, Right, if you don't want a site with columns and buttons and things, then a lot of times you're better off not using a framework. You're better off just using HTML and CSS. And finally, we don't think a lot about load times at this, when you're building smaller sites, we don't think a lot about load times. But these frameworks do add a little bit of load time to your site. So that might be something that you want to consider. All right, so in the next lesson, we will get started with Bootstrap.